Hi, this is Lou, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to have a little bit of a chat about watercolour. So over the next few weeks I've got a few videos coming up which are going to be taking you through some of the basics of watercolour. So if you're a beginner, then I hope this will be really useful for you. If you've got experience with watercolour, then you can skip the technical bits at the start. There's going to be a little bit of technical explanation of something watercolour related at the start of each video, and then we'll get into a pattern making project. I just thought I'd start with a bit of a chat. So I've got my cup of tea. I first got a set of watercolours like this probably about 20 years ago. In fact, it was this exact set. I went and did a painting and drawing course, as you do, and it had been billed as like learn a bit of everything. So what I was really interested in was learning to paint with acrylics. We didn't actually get round to that. I think we maybe did 1 week in the entire year. But we did lots and lots with watercolour, and I really discovered that I liked ink and wash. So that's where you draw lines with a fine liner pen and then add watercolour over the top. But we spent a lot of time at the beginning just kind of doing watercolour landscapes, and I really was not enjoying it. I was not particularly very good at it. I felt that they were all like wishy-washy. I wasn't having fun. And I was about to give up, and then I thought, hang on, I don't have to do this. I can sit through the course and I can learn things, I can take things in, but I don't have to, come out at the end and be like a watercolour landscape painter. I can do other things with it. So after one session, I came home and I took a piece of paper, I divided it up into little squares, and I painted each square a different colour. And that's all I did. And I think I kind of discovered something that was true to me. It was true to who I was becoming as an artist, and the kind of art that I liked to engage with and like to look at. So I was really inspired by artists like Paul Klee and Bridget Riley and people doing these kind of really nice abstract pieces. So I began to see watercolour as a tool that you could do other things with, but it took a fair bit of time to get to that point. And it's only really been in the last year that I kind of really picked it up again. I've done bits and pieces with watercolour over the last 20 years, but I've worked in lots of different media. And it was only last year when things started to lock down, and I wanted to create some art tutorials to put online for people who were stuck at home. And I thought that watercolour was either a medium that people were already likely to have, or it was something that was fairly easily obtainable. So I started creating line and wash tutorials and pattern pieces. And I've really enjoyed doing that, and I've really enjoyed doing that for you all. So I want to continue with that. So this series is kind of a continuation of that. I just thought it would be a really good time to kind of go in depth, because I usually start tutorials kind of assuming that you've got watercolours, that you know what to do with them, that you know what to paint them on, etc., etc. And I thought it would be really good to kind of go and look at the kind of the basics. So today I wanted to have a chat about watercolour supplies, and I think the most important thing to learn is that you can use whatever you've got. So if you've got something, then use it. You don't need to have the best paints, you don't need to have this particular brand, you don't need, just use what you've got. But if you're starting this fresh and you don't have anything, then this may be a little bit of a guide as to kind of where to get started, what things to look for. So 3 basic things. Firstly, there's the paint. Secondly, there's something to paint it on, so you'll need some paper. And then the third thing is something to paint it with, so some brushes. So let's go through those in turn. So firstly, paints. So watercolour paints either come in pans or they come in tubes. If you buy a set like this, then you get little pans of watercolour, solid paint, that they usually come wrapped in paper, and you take all the paper off, and you can swap them out of the palettes, of the sets. You can swap them out, you can lift out the little trays and then pop the pans of paint out. This size is actually a half pan. So that's the most common size that you'll buy, is a half pan, but you can get full pans too. So I'm not going to talk about the benefits of different brands because I haven't used them all, I haven't tested them, so I don't really know what they're like. But when you're shopping for paints, there are a few things to look out for. So most manufacturers will have different ranges of paints. So sometimes they'll have 2 and sometimes they'll have 3. So quite often there's like an artist grade and a student grade. And then there's sometimes like craft paints as well, which are kind of a lower grade again. The difference between the artist grade or the professional grade and the student ones is usually the amount of pigment there is, like the percentage concentrate in the pan. So the artist grade paints will be more expensive, but that means they've got more of the expensive pigment in it. So the paint shall hopefully go further. That doesn't mean to say that student grade colours are like pale and insignificant. They're not. So I've got this set of Cotman watercolours, which is Winsor & Newton's kind of cheaper range. And then I've also got a set of the professional watercolours. And you know, there's a difference. You can tell that there's a bit of a difference. But, you know, it's not massive. So yeah, so if you're starting out, you don't think you have to go and buy the most expensive paints that there are. You don't need them. There's plenty of good quality paint out there that's not like the most expensive, you know, £10 a pan kind of thing. And you'll still get excellent results with them. Paint comes in tubes as well, and I've got a few here. And these are the same range as these pans. So these are Winsor & Newton Cotman, and I've just got these 3. And what you can do with the tube paints is you can use them straight from the tube, which if you want really bright colours, if you want to paint something really vibrant, can be really helpful because you can get like a really good concentration of pigment fresh from the tube. That does go through your paint quite quickly though, so you want to be careful about that. But the other thing that you can do is you can squeeze it out into a palette and then you can let it dry, and you can always kind of reinvigorate it by adding water again. So you can even buy a tube like this and then refill your pan set from the tubes just by squeezing the paint into the pan when it's empty and allowing it to dry. So if you're getting started, what should you get? Well, you could get a little set like this, set of 6, 8, 12 colours will be good enough to get you started. You could get a set of just 3 colours. If you're really on a budget and you kind of want to start this, then I recommend just getting 3 colours, and I'll talk a little bit in the next video about what colours to get, and you'll be able to mix pretty much any colour that you like from just 3. Of course, it's fun to have lots of colours, and I love that. It's like having a little sweet box that you can choose from, but you don't really need them. You can always mix colours, and you can get a whole rainbow of colours just from a small number of paints. So let's talk about paper. Watercolour paper can be really expensive. So it's useful to look for some kind of paper that you can just practice with. This is what I use all the time. I use this in a lot of videos. I use it for practice. I buy this in blocks of 50. It comes in smaller blocks as well, but I really like a block of 50 because it means that I never have to worry about going, I've only got 10 sheets. How am I gonna preserve them? I've got to be careful with them. If I buy the biggest blocks I can, I don't really worry about that. So this is a new block that I haven't started yet. This is like regular paper. It's fairly thick. It's 300 GSM or £140, and it's this is from Cass Arts, which is like a UK art shop. This is their own brand, but there's lots of other alternatives. I have a supplies page on my website, and I'm going to put a link to that down below, and I've got links in there to the regular supplies that I use all the time for watercolour and for other things as well, so I will link that below for you. And then I've got some different options of like better quality watercolour paper. The stuff I really like using is Arches, and it's 100% cotton. It's beautiful stuff. The water and the colour move really lovely. They flow over the surface. It doesn't dry really quickly, so you've got plenty of time to work back into your paints and add extra pigment in. And it really helps you kind of avoid some of the, sometimes when you're painting watercolour, you get like lines where the paint's dried. So the better quality watercolour paper that you can use, the less you have problems with that. And there are differences in the type of paper you get as well. So not just the quality and what the paper's made of, but you get paper with different grains. So you'll have probably seen, if you kind of look to buy watercolour supplies, that watercolour paper comes in, I think, hot pressed, cold pressed and rough. This little pad here I've got is rough watercolour paper, and it just has more of a like rough surface on it, is exactly what it says. It's got more texture on it, so you get more of the pigment settles in the kind of the valleys of the texture, so it kind of looks more granulated. You can get more kind of rough surface by dragging the brush across the paper. The most common paper is cold pressed, and that's paper that's got a little bit of texture on it. So it's got some of that kind of classic watercolour texture on the paper. You'll get like a nice watercolour look when you paint with it because you've got the look of the paper. Yeah, it's a Goldilocks paper. It's kind of in the middle. This paper here, it says CP, not white. And that means that CP is for cold press. Not is another way of saying cold pressed. So sometimes you see that on blocks of paper, not, and that means cold pressed. So that's the middle paper as well. And then the other type of paper you get is hot pressed paper, and that's really smooth. That can be really good if you want to scan your artwork in and you don't want to get any of the paper texture. So it can be really useful for that. It's a little bit more hard to control. So with hot press paper, what you can get is you can get your paint kind of settling unevenly in the page, so you end up with kind of really dark areas and really light areas kind of next to each other, and then it can be harder to smooth them out. And if that's a look you like, then that's great, but if you're wanting something where the colours blend together more evenly, then the cold pressed or the rough paper tends to work better for that. So my recommendation if you're starting out is to buy something that's definitely watercolour paper, is on the cheap side, and get plenty of it so that you can do lots of practicing. And if you've got different types of paper to choose from, I'd go for the cold pressed, just because it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. The paper comes in different forms as well, so you can buy pads of it, either gummed along one edge like this, or with a spiral binding. You can buy them in individual sheets and cut them down to size, or you can buy them in blocks. So with a block, the paper's gummed on all four sides. The benefit of that is that when you paint on it, when you paint on any paper, it'll kind of buckle and it'll move around. But if it's stretched out like this and it's stuck on all four sides, then it won't buckle, and it'll still lay flat. So the brushes you get for watercolour are really quite soft and quite flexible and pliable. So I tend to go for round ones. That's where you look straight on at the brush and it's round profile. They're designed to kind of come to a point when you wet them. So if you put them in water, you can smooth them out so you get a really fine point on the end. That really helps you control your paint, so you can use the point to draw fine lines and to draw into corners and that kind of thing. But you've also got like the body of the brush where the main bristles are, can hold a lot of water and pigment, so you can draw like big shapes with it as well. And then there are different types of bristles that you can get on your watercolour brushes. I've got some synthetic ones and I've got some sable ones, and they're by the same brand. They're good for different things. So the synthetic ones have got a little bit more stiffness and a little bit more body in them, so they're a little bit easier to control. The sable ones are a little softer, so they kind of flow really nicely, but if you want to paint something that's really detailed and precise, they can be a little bit difficult. The sable ones, because they're a natural hair, will hold a lot more water and pigment, so if you want to paint big areas, so it'll be easier to do that with the sable ones. And obviously you'd want to avoid the sable ones if you're vegan and you're avoiding animal products. I think if you're starting out, then you can just do it with one brush. So something that's like a medium-sized brush, so like a 6 or a 7, will give you the best of both worlds. You'll be able to pick up enough pigment and water with it to draw shapes with it, but it'll have a nice fine point on it that you can use for drawing fine lines as well. But then if you can afford it, I'd get a really small one and a really big one as well. So that's the basics for painting. There are a few other things which can be useful. So a pencil and a razor, and I use a ruler quite a bit. I like to create nice clean margins. Sometimes I like to set up a regular structure. a regular grid structure or to kind of precisely measure where I want bits of my pattern to be. Masking tape and washi tape. If you're using lots of water with your paper, it's a really good idea to stretch it. So that means taping it down around all of the edges. So some masking tape is really useful for that. You can use washi tape as well. The washi tape is really good because it's not as sticky, so you run less risk of tearing your paper when you take it off. The masking tape you have to be a little bit more careful with as you remove it because you can tear the paper. But you can also use a hairdryer and warm it up a little bit, and then it should peel off, and it just kind of melts the adhesive a little bit so it peels off a bit easier. So you can mix watercolour with other media too, and I quite like using pens and watercolour together. So I've got some pigment pens, some fine liner pens. These are all waterproof, so you can use them underneath the watercolour and then paint over the top, or you can use them on top of the watercolour once the watercolour is dry. I've also got some acrylic marker pens like these in white, which you can use over the top of the watercolour once it's dry. So I found with these white ones, sometimes they look great on top of the watercolour and they really kind of pop, and other times they kind of fade in and they look like nothing. You can really never tell until you start drawing with them. And yeah, sometimes it's really hard to know. But when they work really well. So something else you might find useful and is quite fun to play with is masking fluid. Now it's like a rubbery stuff that you paint onto the surface of your paper, and then it blocks bits of the paper, so when you paint over the top, the paint doesn't go through those areas. Now you normally buy it in like a little bottle and then you paint it on with an old paintbrush, but I have got a masking fluid marker pen, and this is great fun to play with. I'm going to be using this in one of the sessions later on in the month. So you just draw with it and it draws this bluey gummy stuff all over your page. You paint over the top of it and then you just rub it away and you're left with the white of the page where the masking fluid had been. And I think that's it. That's a lot of chat for one session, but now we're going to get down to painting a pattern, and because this is the first of a series, we're going to do something really simple and we're going to paint a little pebble pattern in lots of bright colours. So all of the projects I'm going to do this week, I'm going to do on this paper. This is the Langton by Dale Rowney. It's an A4 pad, and it's not the most expensive paper, it's not the cheapest, it's somewhere in the middle. I'm going to be using the cold pressed paper. And then I'm going to be using this synthetic brush, and this is a size 7. And then this is optional, but for this project I'm going to be using a couple of pens over the top. So sometimes it's nice to do a watercolour project that doesn't involve like a lot of thought or planning. You can just play with the colours, see what you like, see how they react with one another, and see how they react on the paper. So I've got my pad of watercolour paper, and sometimes I'm going to stretch the paper, but for this one I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to do it straight on the pad, just because I want to get straight into it. I've got a little bit of tissue paper, like paper towel. But yeah, cotton rag works just as well. And then I've got 2 jars of water. The reason I've got 2 jars is because one jar can get kind of muddy really quickly. So there's 2 ways of using the 2 jars of water. You can either use one to wash your brush and then keep one as kind of cleaner water that then you can use into your paint and mix it together. Or what I've taken to doing recently is having one jar that is about washing out warm colours and one jar for washing out cool colours. So we'll get on to what warm and cool colours are a little bit later on, but for now, warm colours are kind of reds and yellows and cool colours are blues and greens. So the purpose of this is to get to know your colours, to get to know your paints. So I'm going to use lots of different colours from here. And I'm just kind of going to go with my gut and pick the colours I like and then mix different colours together and see what happens. All I want to do is to paint circles. So I'm just wetting my brush and then pick a colour. I'm going to go with this one. Take a bit of colour, put it in the palette. Keep adding different amounts of the pigment and water until you've got something that you're quite happy with. And then I'm just going to start in the top left corner up here, and I'm going to start drawing a circle. Now I'm really not going to be careful about my circle. I don't want it to be precise. I'm just going to draw a rough circle and then fill it in. Now I want to move on to the next. So I'm just going to take a slightly different colour, mix it into that one, and that's given me a nice lilac. And then I'm going to draw another circle connecting to the one that I've drawn before. And you should see where the two circles connect that you get like a little bit of a blend between the two colours. If there's more liquid in this section, it'll push this way, and if there's more liquid in this section, it'll push the blend, it'll push the pigment that way. And sometimes you get nice little kind of runs and interesting shapes in those bits where they join. So I fancy a bit more blue, so I'm going to put another kind of wonky circle up there. Now the pink has dried, but the purple hasn't, so the purple's running a little bit into the blue. I'm just going to keep going, adding new colours and spreading my odd circles across the page. So you can see I put quite a bit of pigment in there and it's gone whoosh straight into the blue. The other thing you can do is you can change the colour of your circle as you're painting it. So you can add a bit of a different colour in one side and you get a different look. Now I'm going to change the look of that again by adding a lot more water onto my brush. I've got the same colour, but it's a lot paler now. And if I want to add a little bit more pigment in down one end, I can do that. So I've just now added a little bit more red in there, and the red's really toned the purple down. So you get a much more neutral colour. A little bit more water, and we'll get a nice paler version of that. And then I think I might go back to the pink that I was using originally. There we go. I've got a bit of a gap here. So let's just mix all of those colours together on the palette and then draw my like wobbly oval shape in that gap. Now this blue here is looking a little lost, so I'm going to do a little bit more blue. So that's some of the blue with a little bit of pink mixed into it. And then we can go more blue. There. This is a slightly different blue. And I'm going to add a lot of water in to fill that in. Now for the next one, I've cleaned my brush off entirely. So it's picking up a little bit of pigment from where it's touched, but I'm really just drawing a circle with the water. Filling it all in. And then I can take some colour on my brush and just dot it in. and let it spread around. So I'm going to keep going and filling in the whole sheet like this. I'll speed the video up a little bit, but I'm just doing the same thing over and over and over, but I'll be working through all of the different colours in my palette. When you're finished, give your brush a good clean and take any excess water off on the edge of the jar, and then you can dry it off on your paper towel. You want to leave your brush somewhere flat to dry, so on the table or something like that. If you leave it in the water, you'll end up bending the tip of the brush, and then it'll be more difficult to paint with. So the painting part of this is done. So you can see that this kind of roughly starts with pinks and purples at the top and then moves through greens and then down to oranges at the bottom. But I didn't put a huge amount of thought into it. I just thought, you know, oh, what's the next colour I fancy trying? And then kind of worked my way through the set. So I'm going to wait until this is 100% dry. I'm always really tempted to go in with a pen before it's finished drying. You can use a hairdryer, and if you've got lots of layers and if you're doing a project that requires a lot of drying, then it's probably a good idea to use that. but you can end up kind of splattering your paint across the page if you use a hairdryer with a bit too much force. So I find it best just to go and make a cup of tea and leave it until I'm 100% sure it's dry. So now I've done the painting part, I'm just going to go in and add a little bit of pattern with some pens over the top. I've got a black one and a white one. So here's the first watercolour pattern from this series, and it's kind of like abstract pebbles, but all different colours. So when you finish painting, you'll end up with watercolours in your palette that will dry, and you can just leave them like that if you want to, because if you come back and you want the same colours again, then you don't need to remix them. But if you do want to use the palette and use completely different colours in it, then you can clean it out. Just take a little bit of water, you can re-wet the colours and clean an area of palette out. What you can do is you can reserve different areas of your palette for different kind of colours, so you can always mix blues in this one, or you could always mix reds in this one, and then that way you don't really need to kind of clean them out in between times. You just kind of use up the colours that are in there, and then you only need to clean it out if you're really completely changing the colours. So thanks very much for watching today. I really hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you give the pebble pattern a go. If you do and you want to share it, then share it on Instagram and tag me at LouRachelDavis. I love to see the things that you make, and if I see it, then I will try and share it in my stories too. So if you've got any comments or questions, or if I got anything wrong, then leave it down in the comments below. If you liked the video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more like this, then please do subscribe. I've got a series of 8 videos coming up in April, which are all about watercolour, each with a different kind of like technical chat stuff at the beginning, and then a pattern making project afterwards. And if you don't want to miss any of those, if you press the little bell button, then you should get a notification from YouTube every time I post a video. So I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks very much. Bye bye.